Good evening. We're going to be in Genesis chapters 29 and 30. We're picking up where we left off last time. It's been a while. But last we saw, Jacob was fleeing his brother Esau. His father told him to go back to the land where he was from and to go find a wife. And so this is when he left, and he actually established the town of Bethel by sleeping on a rock, and had a dream. In the dream, he saw a ladder going from heaven to earth, and climbing on the ladder, going up and down, were angels. And he said, "This has got to be the place of God." So he lifted up the rock and poured oil on it, and called the place Bethel, or House of God. That's where we left off from him. In fact, his brother saw that their dad sent him away to find a wife, and he actually, out of spite, went and married people in Canaan, because he was angry, evidently angry at his father for giving his brother the promise, blessing. So Jacob, of course, taking that from Esau, and that was part of the deal that he made for that bowl of soup, right? It all correlates somehow and works together. And he just seems to have abandoned any hope or any thought of trying to follow God. And this is incidentally whenever Jacob found God in a sense, because this is where he's at that time of that dream. When he woke up, he told God, "If you will be with me and bring me back to this land after I leave this place, if you'll be with me and come back with me and bring me back, then you'll be my God." And of course, we look at that and say, we don't really like to make ultimatums to God. We don't want to tell God, "You take care of me and then I'll consider being your servant." But this was a big step for him. And he started following God, and you could start seeing a change in his character, evidently, from this point on. He's starting to grow up, he's starting to learn, but he also starting to get a dose of his own medicine in this next section. So chapters 29 and 30, I said 39 and 40, but it's 29 and 30. And looking at what happened here, there is a ton of things that happen in this short space of time, in this short two chapters, about 14 years, or actually maybe closer to 20 years or more passed during these two chapters. But there's a lot of things that happen. So we're looking at Genesis chapter 30 in verse 27, and this is really the highlight to me of this section, where it says, well, let's start in verse 25. "It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, 'Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you.' And Laban said to him, 'Please stay if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake.'" And that stands out to me as something that's very important. It's not because the idea of blessing that is there, but it's because he has seen activities that God had done toward Jacob. And Laban has realized that he's been blessed, he's better off because Jacob is there. And it's a very important idea, and I think that we can find some ways to make this fit into our own lives. But I want you to think about the things that had happened to him, and even the considerations. After this, there's still some things that happened too. We'll get into that as we go through it. But look at the things that happened. First of all, he found Rachel after he had the dream of the ladder. He went in, he's watering sheep, and he sees Rachel come up, and so they have this big long discussion. And actually, he just walks up to Rachel and kisses her and says, "You're family." And so she runs off and tells her father that her cousin is there. And they invite him in, and he stays with Laban for a month. And after a month, evidently he was working for Laban, and he was helping Laban. And he wasn't being lazy, because Laban came to him and said, "It's not really fair for you, since you're family, for you to work with me for no pay. So tell me what you want." And by this time, he had already developed a big love for Rachel. And he says, that's what I want right there. I will work for 7 years for her. And we're talking about things. We all know this is a very different world that we're in here, right? Very different from us. And it's very hard to imagine me saying, yeah, you can just marry my daughter and forcing her into a marriage like this. But this was very common back then. And so this is what he agreed to. So he worked for 7 years, and it's amazing. He says his love for her was so great that the 7 years felt like a matter of days. He just had his eyes on the prize, right? And after 7 years of work, he finally went to Laban and said, I've done the work. I need my wife. And so they had a great party for him. They got married. And we all know what happened. Laban actually slipped in his older daughter. And because of that, then he wakes up and realizes this is not who I thought I was having. And the things that happened, actually, I think I'm getting ahead of myself on verse 15. He says, tell me what your wages should be. So it says in verse 16 of chapter 29, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. And so this is part of the process. And Rachel, of course, was younger than Leah. And so whenever there was time for the wedding, Laban just put Leah there instead of Rachel. And evidently, we're not exactly sure what happened. We don't know if there was drinking involved. We don't know if maybe because of they had face coverings, if he was fooled, it was dark. But for whatever reason, he wakes up and the wrong person is in the tent with him. And so he goes to Laban and says, what in the world happened? He said, it's not good in our custom, in our country, to marry the second born off before the first. And so if you'll go ahead and agree to work another 7 years, I'll go ahead and give Rachel to you. Just perform your week of duty with Leah. So he agrees and ends up with 2 wives for the price of 1. Actually, it's for a price of 2 because he had to work another 7 years, right? And this is a very interesting situation that he's in because, of course, the surprise honeymoon morning in the new terms, because there's a strange thing that starts happening in chapter 29, and that is in chapter 30 also, but mainly 29, and that is the sisters start competing with one another to see who can have the most kids. And this is a very strange idea, right? And this is part of the reason that polygamy is unwise, and it's not because, well, if you put 2 women together, they're going to misbehave. And it's not that at all. It's a fact that if you have more than 2 people in the marriage, there's going to be starting to be competition for affection. And it's a very unhealthy thing, not only for the family, for the couple, but also for the kids. Can you imagine seeing that? In fact, there are weird things that happen. I mean, there's the thing with the mandrakes where time was bought to have private time with Jacob by his own wives. So there's competition and all kinds of bad things that are going on, and it's a very strange situation as we know how it works. And then we also see that he's shepherding under very harsh conditions. In fact, he's kind of set himself up in this situation where he feels responsible for everything that, and he's watching over Laban's flock. That's what his job was. And he feels responsible for everything that happens to that flock. So anything that happened, any of it was eaten or any of it was stillborn, anything that happened, any of his flock died, he replaced it with his own stuff, with his own animals. And he also was out there night and day. He didn't have much help. I don't know what Laban's sons were doing, but they evidently weren't helping much. And he's doing a lot of work. And what happens is there starts to become blessings as a result of the work that he's doing. And so this is what's going on. And those are the events. And then the results are that, well, first of all, he has 11 children in just a few short years. I don't know how many years actually went by, but it wasn't very many. And you'd say, well, there's 11 kids, but remember, there's 4 women involved. So some of them had several, and Rachel only had 1 at this time. She'll have 2, and coming up shortly, there'll be a second one. But there were a lot of kids all at one time, and there were very little differences in age because they were in competition with each other. And the names of the children all show that kind of competition that was going on. And it's very, very strange. But Can you imagine being in that situation? You know, whenever I was growing up and going to Bible class, we always drew pictures of, we had the pictures, the actual photographs. Evidently somebody outlined them so we can see and color them in, right? But they were always with these kids in this situation, this time frame. They always had lots of kids around, and everyone was always happy. I remember seeing that. And so that's very much probably not what happened. This was probably a very, very tense time. It was probably pretty stressful. And if you can imagine all the kids running around and all the problems, and he's never there, and when he is there, they're fighting over him and all kinds of things like that are happening. And then he's dealing with Laban, his father-in-law, who is also his uncle, who is changing the wages on him, he says 10 times. So everything that he is trying to do, he's running into problem after problem after problem because of these things. And sure, a lot of that's because he brought it on himself, still facing them. Here's 11 children in a few short years. There's a feeling of abandonment from Leah and Rachel's father. They were talking about leaving, and Rachel and Leah, they both said, he's already taken all the money that he received as dowry, and he's already spent it all. We're really nothing to him. And that's the way they felt their father thought about them. And so Jacob then felt fine with taking them away, which is going to happen actually in chapter 31. And in chapter 30, we have the situation then where he is told to go into an agreement with Laban. So this is after then Laban approaches him and says, I've been really blessed for you being around. Please consider staying as a hired servant of mine. And so he agrees. And the payment was, he's going to say, you get all, I get all you get the speckled and the spotted, right? And so all the speckled and spotted are mine, and all the pure ones are yours. And the theory behind this is the pure ones will never produce speckled and spotted sheep or goats, because that's not in the genetics. So the purity of that then would continue to multiply, and he would continue to see increase. And so he says, if you ever see any of those in my place, among my people, among my sheep, then that aren't speckled and spotted, I stole them. So he agreed, and he took him off a distance. I think it's a half day's distance away. So he separated the herds out. But God did some amazing things to that herd, because the one that's the pure herd, this is the one that God, he saw in a vision, Jacob saw in a vision that the speckled, when they mated, there was speckled, they were speckled and spotted. And they didn't look that way, but they were in this vision. And as a result, there was more and more of these that were being born that shouldn't have been born, but they were being born speckled and spotted, so they became Jacob's. And so there was a lot of that kind of thing happening, and Laban's riches were starting to dwindle, and Jacob's were increasing, and he wasn't doing anything. God was doing all this for him. And so this is there's the result of that, and God's blessing him, and he's taking actually from Laban and giving it to Jacob. Jacob assumes that the reason is because Laban has mistreated him. And you can imagine why. If you had a huge herd and all the animals start being born speckled and spotted, so they become Jacob's, you're going to go change the terms. So he changed the terms over and over constantly, and every time he changed the terms, God blessed Jacob even more and so his herd increased. And it got to the point, actually at the beginning of chapter 31, where he's afraid because he knows that Laban and Laban's sons are talking about them and talking about how they are stealing from them and taking from them, even though they haven't done any of it, but God has blessed them, and they know it. So here, that's an interesting situation, and that's what's going on, fear of retaliation from the sons of Laban. But then again, we have blessings that are going on. We have the 11 children. This is the foundation for the nation of Israel. Now, there will be a 12th one that will be born in a little bit. There are 12 tribes. And this is the foundation for the children of Israel. This is literally the children of Israel, because Jacob is named Israel. And they have he has huge flocks of sheep and goats. He was a very rich man after this. You know, it's interesting when you look through the passage, there's no place that it says that he received anything from Abraham except the blessing. He didn't leave with any animals of his own. In fact, he had basically a staff and a shirt on his back. And he left that way, and he's going to, when he goes home, he's going to have mountains of money. He's going to be extremely wealthy. And God has blessed him tremendously. And he also blessed Laban and those sons tremendously as well until they started changing things. God blessed them. And then we had, of course, blessings upon Laban and his family on their behalf. So I think there's a lot of things that we can think about with this. And this is a very simple idea, but I think of myself when I try to put myself in their shoes and what does that mean for us? For me, it's, will my life be a blessing to the people who are around me? That stands out to me as an important idea. And all the drama that we face in life, and all the ups and downs, and all the problems, and I don't know. We could probably take a show of hands, but how many of you, your life turned out exactly like you thought it was going to? And how many twists and turns have you had? And how many? Looking back, I don't even remember exactly what I thought I was going to get, but it's nothing like I thought it was going to be. But yet, it's in some ways, it's everything I was wanting. And that's what God does for us. He gives us blessing upon blessing, and it may not be everything that we want. I understand that, but it is blessing upon blessing. But there's this kind of a haze. There's this kind of fog about life. Right? There's so many difficulties and problems. We really don't know what's up and down sometimes. We don't know where we're going sometimes. We don't know what path we're on. I mean, we're going to go to heaven, sure, but we don't know what our next step is going to be sometimes. It's very difficult on us. And even when stresses come around, and even when people are mistreating us, and people they do some pretty mean things sometimes, it's very hard to see where we're going. But the question is, will I be a blessing to the people who are around me? And I don't know if Jacob ever thought of that he ever thought that he would be a blessing to Laban and his family. He just wanted to get by. He just wanted to have, he wanted to live, and he wanted to have his own life. And even with that, even though his mind wasn't necessarily set on being a blessing, he still was a blessing. And the reason for that is because he was a child of God. He was part of the lineage. He was part of the promise that God had passed on to him. So through his seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And that's not just talking about Jesus. So it is talking about Jesus. It's also factoring in the fact that if you are on God's path, and God is with you on the path, you will be blessed, and the people around you will be blessed. You just can't help it. Now, there's some interesting things that I've read across. Now, let's go ahead and turn to 1 Peter. But I remember reading some. I was looking for it today. I could not find it, but I was reminded of some arguments that were given in the first few centuries of the church, where people were arguing against being persecuted by the Roman Empire. And they're trying to convince these governors to allow the Christians to assemble and exist and not be mistreated. And one of the things he said was, Christians in your community are a blessing to you. And he backed that up by talking about how that they are morally upright people, that they're not committing crimes, that they're not running other people down, or they're not doing things that are improper or immoral. Another thing they said was that they're helping the people who are sick, and that people know that they can go to a Christian and they would give them the shirt off their back if they had the ability to do that. Whatever it is that they needed, they would try their best to fulfill their needs. And so in every place where Christians lived, the environment, the culture, and the society as a whole was uplifted by them because they had an impact on the people around them. because they understood what it meant to be a Christian. So 1 Peter chapter 1 deals with this, and Peter really is dealing with the idea of being persecuted, and that ties into what this man was saying. Even though Christians were being mistreated and persecuted and called all kinds of terrible things. You know, they used to call Christians pagans? No, not pagans, atheists, because they didn't follow the gods of the Romans. And they even said that let me think how to say this. You know, I used to make all kinds of jokes about people in Arkansas. I'm sorry if you're watching online and you're from Arkansas, but I would. You ever make jokes about people in Arkansas? One of the things we'd say was their trees don't fork when we're talking about their family trees because they intermarry. And that's what they accuse Christians of doing. Do you know why they accuse them Christians of doing? Because I call my wife my sister. That doesn't mean that I married my biological sister, right? But that's what they took, and they would call Christians names based on that. They all kinds of things to them, and not just names, but persecutions and trials, death, all kinds of things came. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, where Peter's kind of dealing with this idea. He says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." Okay, so this is what the end result, the result of their various trials is going to be. In verse 7, the genuineness of their faith, even though it's tested, may be found to the praise of God. Well, it will be found to the praise of God by God himself. It will also be seen by Christians who see that and praise God because of the influence of other Christians. Isn't it a wonderful thing when you see someone who you know is hurting, who you know is going through all kinds of difficulties and trials and challenges, and they come to services anyway? Isn't that a wonderful thing to see? It's encouraging for all of us. And just to see that they're putting the effort in, it shames me sometimes in the way I see other people behave. But we also need to recognize that sometimes that recognition and the praise and glory and honor that comes at the revelation of Christ might actually also be from people who are not Christians. And that's what he's talking about in chapter 2, verses 9 through 12. He says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation." Now, when Jacob ran with his two wives, and all their children, Laban chased them down, and God warned him in a dream, "Do not say anything to this man, good or bad." And so he went up to him and said, "Why did you do this? Why did you run?" He said, "I was afraid of you. I was afraid you were going to harm me." And that story then really what comes about is that Jacob is justified. Laban has to recognize that he hasn't done anything wrong, and so he lets him go. That's part of what's going on here in 1 Peter chapter 2. It's going to come a time when our behavior is going to be justified. People are going to realize that the things that we're doing are right and good. And in fact, it could just be that the influence that we have on the people around us, the blessing that we can be to other people simply by being in the vicinity, because God is blessing us, it carries over sometimes to other people. Those kinds of things can add up to people even become believers. There's influences that we have on people in life that we may never recognize, and they may move off, we may move off. They are at different times. We're old and they're young. Maybe we die before we see the results. But there are people, it's very possible that there are people around in your life who will benefit because you are a Christian and maybe even come to the Lord because of it. We don't actually know how things are going to work, but I do know one thing, and we can see this in the book of Genesis and all throughout the Bible, God is always working on people. He's always creating opportunities, goading even, for people to come to him and build that relationship with him. Very simple ideas, but I think this is something we can get from these few chapters here in this. And this is going to kind of shining through, you can't read that, it says shining through the fog of a difficult life. We can shine our light no matter where we are or what we think we can do for you tonight. Please let us help you. If there's any prayers of the church, you need to be baptized for the remission of your sins, whatever it is, please won't you come as we stand and sing.